Hi, everybody. Welcome to our book club this evening. My name is Kelly Booth. I'm the proud director of our AFT's Share My Lesson website. And I'm very excited to kick off our book club this evening with Diane Ravitch. And joining us for the beginning of this conversation is our AFT President, Randi Weingarten, a good friend of Diane's who's going to kick this off. Randi has been flying really all around the world and is now off to the airport once again. So she's joining us as much as she can before she's going on to the other part of the world, um, flying there today. So Randi, thank you so much for joining us for this book club. My colleague, Mary Catherine Ricker, is going to join us as well. And so she just landed as well. We're juggling lots of airplanes and travels and stuff like that with all the weather, but we're excited to have everybody. All right, so Randi, let me turn this over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And I am on my way. We have a meeting with members in Hawaii. So I am on my way there after doing a bunch of meetings today during the day. So my apologies for the way in which, we are doing this tonight. But it was really, really important to do a conversation with Diane Ravitch about her new book before the end of this year. Diane's new book came out, which is a book called saying "An Education," it's how I changed my mind about schools and almost everything else. To preview, I was crying as I was reading each and every us. Aside of herself, that some of us who know her well have known, but didn't know all of it. Didn't know the side from her growing up, the way in which she approached problems and questions, the way in which she looked at the world, and most importantly, the way that, and very few people in life do this, when Diane is incredibly, she's an incredible scholar. She understands education in ways that even those of us in education may never understand. And when she saw that things that she believed in didn't work, she had the audacity she had the courage to actually say, I'm changing my mind. And so it was really important to have Diane talk about her book and her life in terms of for all of us, because we see this all the time. How many times does education zigzag through the maze of somebody thinking they have a great new idea, only for it never to work and never to use or listen to public school teachers about what they believe and what they do and they are. So I just really wanted to start this conversation as I'm rushing to the airport, just to really say to Diane, thank you so much for who you are, what you've done, and also having the courage, not only of your convictions, but the courage to see what is and what isn't going on, and shouting it out, and ensuring that people understand that the heart of education is what we need to do. First question, Di, and then I know that Mary Catherine will go and ask you others, but I really, really, really wanted to say thank you. And my first question is, what kind of power is it to admit that I was wrong? What kind of power, what does it take to do that? But what kind of power do you feel because of it?
Well, I would say that the most important thing about saying, I made a mistake, I was wrong, is that it makes you feel so good, because you don't have to cover up, you don't have to pretend, you don't have to go on saying things that you know aren't true, and people do that all the time. And so when I came to the conclusion that I was on the wrong side of history and that I wanted to make things right, it really felt great to say, I made a mistake, and it was a big one. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. And that's what I've been doing. It's been really more than 15 years since I've been on this kind of activist role in my career, trying to right things. And I'm so grateful, Randi, for your friendship and for the strength of the AFT and also the NEA. And I know that unions are under fire. They have been since the 1930s. And you guys are the strongest pillar standing for all the hopes and dreams of people who are trying to have a better life. And I'm just grateful that you're flying around the country and doing the things you're doing because we live in bad times. And it's people like you who we turn to because you're doing things that the rest of us can't do. And thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Catherine, but as I do, I just want you to tell people of what the Network for Public Education is and what you've been doing, really pouring your life into for the last 15 years.
Absolutely. About 2012, 2013, a friend of mine who is a teacher in the Oakland Public Schools, Anthony Cody, he and I were brainstorming about what we could do to try to change the kind of public dialogue about education. We kept hearing from very powerful people in the Obama administration, but really from both parties, that education was failing, the teachers were terrible, the test scores had to be everything, and we had to get our scores up or our nation would go under. And we knew that none of this was true. And we thought, well, we have to have an organization. And we began figuring out how to do it. And we eventually, with Randi's help and a lawyer's help, figured out, well, we can't be a PAC because we can't raise money. It's too complicated. 50 states with 50 different laws, forget about it. But we could create something that's called the Network for Public Education. And the purpose of it is to unite people who care passionately about public schools, understand the importance of public schools in sustaining a strong democracy, and who want to have a vehicle to work together. You know, a lot of people are isolated. They work in their own community. They may know that there's a state group, which they may or may not be part of. And we wanted, as a network, to be a network, to have a way for people to know each other and to work together within the state and across state lines. So we put out reports. We have one that came out just today about charter schools, about how they can be repaired and the things that have to be done. One example is they should never be for profit. They should have public oversight. I mean, they should have real accountability. There are 10 proposals that we have, and we have spent, the Network for Public Education has spent a huge amount of time and resources looking at the charter sector and seeing how vast promises are made about how they'll be better than public schools, and then calling themselves public schools when they're not. And so we put out I think, a very constructive report about how to repair the things that went wrong with charter schools. But the other thing that we do is we have an annual meeting. Our next one's going to be next September in Houston, and we bring together people from basically all 50 states. And again, it's a lot of networking. We find people who are doing wonderful things, and they share their experience and their knowledge with their counterparts from around the country. So it's been a kind of an abundance of riches as we've had terrific people, Randi, Becky Pringle, but also scholars and people who are out in the field, people who are working on school boards who've had successes that they want to talk about or defeats that they want to talk about. And that's what we do. We're not a union. We are people who care passionately about education. We have a lot of teachers who are members. I hope that all of you will join. It doesn't cost anything. And then you get access to all of the resources we have, including the website, which has these terrific reports on it, Network for Public Education. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Diane, so much for sharing that. I'm going to continue going. I know Mary Catherine landed, and she's going to be joining shortly, and she's so excited to have this conversation with you. I put Just to orient everybody, I put the link to networkforpubliceducation.org in the attendee chat, so people can access that website that you were just mentioning there. But I also have to say, Diane, and I didn't get a chance to talk to you about this when we started, that when I was doing my Master's of Education, and we were reading a lot of your blogs with Deborah Meyer and Education Week, Bridging Differences, and it was really kind of fun to see that really healthy dialogue of like where you guys agreed and where you disagreed on things. And I feel like this book is also just more of an extending so much of those conversations, and I just appreciate it very much having you here right now.
Well, funnily enough, just yesterday I saw Deborah. She's now 94 years old.
Oh my
She's sharp
gosh.
as ever, but she's physically not well. She can't walk and she uses a wheelchair, but she's still brilliant. Follows everything that's going on. Is immensely dismayed with what's happening to education, and seeing many of the things she spent her life working on rolled back by the Trump administration and by their followers around the country.
That's so interesting. I mean, in terms of her dismay or your dismay, I mean, what are some of the biggest shifts? I mean, you talk about this in your book, but what are some of the biggest changes that were your aha moments? I know Randi alluded to saying that she'd had those conversations with you, but you now are saying some of this stuff a lot more publicly.
Well, the most important thing was that I had been an advocate for charter schools. I actually testified in Albany on behalf of charter legislation, which passed. And I saw all the possibilities that people then saw, because there were very few, if any, charter schools back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I thought, gosh, everybody will have people who are devoted to the school. And I thought that they wouldn't be a challenge to public education, but that they would be collaborators. And I had talked at great length with Al Shanker about his vision for charter schools, and it was very persuasive. Al talked about charter schools as being collaborators with public schools, and saying they would be the R&D component of public education. And so charter schools would take the kids who were turned off. He said the kids who were sitting in the back of the class with their head down, who just didn't care, weren't interested. And he said, if we could encourage teachers to create charter schools, that they would be part of the public school system, and they would have a charter for 5 years. After 5 years, they'd turn in their charter. They'd already tried their ideas out. If they wanted to continue another 5 years, that would be it, but they would not be permanent entities. And so he initially was a supporter of charter schools. He also thought that charter schools would all be approved by the local union as well as the local school board, so that there would be no adversarial relationships. And the idea was completely hijacked. It was hijacked by various ideologues in Wisconsin, and their idea was it Wisconsin or Minnesota? I think it was Wisconsin. But the idea of the first charters was no unions. Anybody can get a charter. You don't have to be an educator to be a charter. You don't have to have approval by the local school board. And the charters are standalone schools that call themselves public schools because that's how they get money. But I've always considered them to be private schools that get public money.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Diane. I'm going to take this opportunity. Mary Catherine Ricker, Executive Director of Al Shanker and our partner in this AFT Book Club, has just joined us. And I think the two of us are just going to go back and forth and have a good conversation with you. Mary Catherine, I was sharing with Diane that when I was getting my Master's of Education, I read a lot of Diane's books and also read a blog that she did with Deborah Myers in Education Week, Bridging Differences. So we're having a conversation about that and how things have evolved. So I'll pass this next question to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. And Diane, this is an absolute thrill to be able to visit with you today and talk about this book. This book was riveting to me. You were so personal, and you were just so detailed And I just am so grateful for the way you took us through the the things that influenced you, the ways you rethought things, the way you researched, and then like really held yourself to high standards, and then therefore held others to high standards as well. I feel similarly. I remember as a teacher new to St. Paul's public schools, being handed one of your books and being told, you know, you are becoming an activist. You need to read this, and you need to know who Diane Ravitch is. And I am so grateful to have learned who you were, you know, in the early 2000s. And I completely agree that Education Week blog that you wrote with Deborah Meyer was so such like in the same way there was must see TV for, you know, NBC. There, that was like must read writing for me. And I'm just really grateful for this book. And
Well, it was a very personal activity for me. I mean, I've done a lot of books where I went to the library and did research and had footnotes and all of that, and I know how to do that, and I've done it again and again. But this book, I really was working from, this is my life, and this is who I am. This is what made me who I am. And there's no index and there are no footnotes. It's a personal statement about my life, how I became a voice in education, and how I realized after many years of advocating for standards, high stakes testing, meritocracy, choice, that I was wrong. And it was not easy to come to that conclusion. But I once I reached that point, I realized the most important thing I can do is explain that I was wrong and why, and try to tell my story. So this is the question that I have been asked many times. I've done a lot of traveling around the country and speaking and meeting teachers and parents and students. And the first question everyone asks is, why did you change your mind? So I said, well, I guess that's the book I have to write. But it starts with my being born. So that had nothing to do with my changing my mind, but there you go.
I thought that was brilliant, though, to really start with a lot of the foundational ways that you found out who you were. And throughout the book, I think that's a common theme. I do have to mention, since you brought this up just now, and you brought it up a couple times in your book, that you make sure that you mention when you got different faculty positions or when you got different positions, when those came with a library card. And we see a lot of our libraries under attack right now. And I feel, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I do feel like that was very purposeful on your point, to point out that getting that library card meant that much to you, because it meant that you were going to have access to the research materials you needed, and you were going to have access to libraries. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what libraries have meant to you as a researcher, as an historian, and in the work you're doing now.
Well, I can't, I have a t-shirt that says, I can't live without books. And I feel the same way. And I can't live without books. You can look behind me to see what matters to me. And I have to say, just as an aside, I once met Arnie Duncan in his office, and Randy arranged for me to meet with him. And I went to try to explain to him why the testing was overwhelming and too much, and he had to cut back on it, not expand it. And that was before he announced Race at the Top. And his assistant, who was there, said to me, "You measure what you treasure." And I said, "But that's not true. You don't measure what you treasure. I treasure my children. How do I measure them? Do I say that one is better than the other? Do I measure them by their height or their weight or their whatever their test scores are? No, you don't measure what you treasure. I love my dog and my cat. I don't know how to measure them either. So what they've been measuring and spending so much effort on is almost beside the point, because it's not education. It's a measurement in time that is, I've come to understand, highly biased in favor of people who are literate, people who have parents who are literate, people who are young people whose parents are well-to-do, And this is a point I make in the book. Every test in the world that's standardized, the outcomes are arrayed by family income. The richest kids get the highest scores, and the poorest kids get the lowest scores. And you'll always find an outlier, the poor kid who, despite everything, is sensational on the test, and the rich kid who, despite everything, just can't pass the test. But they're outliers. The tests again and again show family income is the single biggest determinant of test scores. So learning that was one of the determinants that really changed my path and made me see that a lot of things I'd been advocating just weren't grounded in reality.
This is what I think appreciate so much about the work you've done and the way you spell it out in the book too. You're not just admitting that you had to change your mind about some things, that you were wrong about some things. You actually became an advocate. And I'm wondering what made your activism as important to you as this admission of changing your mind, or this admission of making a mistake? What made that activism just as important to you?
Well, once I changed my mind, I realized that I had a lot of work to do to convey to people who had followed my work that I was wrong, because I didn't want them to say, oh, I read that you said we have to have higher standards, and the standards would all be based on standardized testing. And I didn't want to go to the end of my life with people not understanding that I had reached a different plane, that I understood things I didn't understand before. And I wanted to share what I knew. And also, because I felt so passionately that we were on the wrong track, I wanted to see if I could persuade policymakers to see that what they were doing was wrong. This is the hardest thing of all. Parents are persuadable. Teachers understand that what's been done to their profession is wrong because they've been turned into testing technicians instead of teachers. They understand that the joy of learning and the joy of teaching has been squashed in favor of standardized testing. But the politicians, the elected officials, don't understand at all. And so I spent a lot of time visiting with elected officials, trying to persuade them and finding out, to my dismay, that basically they don't even think about education. Every 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 years, a bill will come up and they have to take a position, but they don't have a strong point of view. And so they just kind of go with the flow. And the flow is what I call the paradigm. And the paradigm is test scores are everything. Now, we know as parents, as teachers, as kids who, as people who understand children, test scores are not everything. They test how good you are taking tests, really. And sometimes they give you an accurate reflection of what kids have learned, but very often they're not even testing what was taught in the classroom. And very often the tests themselves are defective. But I'll come back to that, but I have to go back and realize I didn't answer the last question you asked me about the importance of librarians. Librarians are very important to me. And I mentioned in the book how going to the school library in elementary school and junior high school, the books I love books about sports and about history, and written for children, of course. But then when I got to high school, I worked in the school library, and it was there that I discovered that all the books about Russia were being censored. I lived in Houston, and Houston was at that time
was fascinating. I had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really how I got interested in education as a professional study. Was working in the library. I found that underneath the circulation desk were maybe 24 books about Russia, and I thought, there are none on the shelves. They're all here. I mean, there may have been something about Russia in the 17th century, but all the books about Russia in the 20th century were under the desk. I used to read the books during my the time I was sitting there and nothing was happening, and it left me with this very strong impression, very strong conviction, really, that freedom to read is crucial, and that the attacks on librarians and on libraries is horrendous, and it's so unworthy of us as a society. And I am active in different organizations like PEN International, And I was on the board of the New York Public Library advocating on behalf of the branches. I think it's so important for kids to have access to books and to have books that spark their imagination. The one thing you can say for certain about standardized tests is that they have nothing to do with creativity, innovation, thinking differently. They're all about conforming and finding the answer that somebody else decided was the right answer. And I think what's more important than the right answer is the right question. And we don't have time to teach that because that's not on the test. And they frequently do not ask good questions. So I think the library is a place for exploration. It was for me. I learned a lot of things that weren't taught in class, and it sparked new interest. And I think that's something that we need to treasure. And we need also, and it's very important to defend our librarians against the attacks on them and the demands for censorship.
I really appreciate that. And again, it was such a common theme. And I really appreciate you bringing us into your high school experience, into your time in Texas, into your time in college. It is clear that describing those places was important for you to share with us. And it really helped, it helped us sort of follow along with you as you traveled this road of deepening your research, sharpening your expertise, questioning where you got. And I am wondering what the role of place is in shaping who we are, or if you even just want to be more personal, what the role of place was in shaping who you are.
Well, Houston was very important to me because, well, I had no choice. That was my home. I was one of 8 children. And my parents, my mother especially, was hardworking. And as I describe in the book, my father liked to fish and loved sports. And he was something of a playboy, except that he wasn't a rich playboy. Growing up in a large family was an experience that I guess made me value my solitude. I used to go off on my own and find, I described how I'd climb a tree with a book and just sit up there and read because I needed the quiet. When you have that many people in a household, 8 children, and people bring their friends over, you need to get away from it. And I learned that about myself early on. Even now, I love to step back and have my solitude. And reading is crucial. Reading is how we enter into different worlds. It was so important to me. So Houston was important in teaching me that I wanted to get out of Houston because I had to find a different world. I didn't, at the time I was growing up in the 1950s, and I graduated high school in 1956. The adolescent society was very conformist. The pressure was on to date, have boyfriends, go to the football games, and there was very little value placed on doing the things I like to do, which was learning about things. I love to learn, and I loved my teachers, and that was considered, you're a brainiac, you're a brainy or something like that. And when I went off to college, I went to a women's college, and I loved being in a women's college because I had always gone to co-ed schools. And it was such a wonderful experience to realize there was no one putting on lipstick, no one trying to impress the guys. And it was just us girls. And we could all be as competitive as we wanted to be without anybody putting us down for being too smart or too brainy or whatever. And I also learned that girls could be anything. That to me was the wonderful thing about going to a women's college was the president of the class was a girl, the president of the chief editor of the newspaper was a girl. All the positions that were held by boys in my high school were held by young women, girls, we called ourselves, in college. So I found college to be an enormously liberating introduction to real liberal education. And I love my teachers.
Apologies for the sound about that. So that chapter, it was so brilliant to just watch your confidence grow, watch your intellect grow. I mean, you shared everything with us. And I think it actually sets up, and I don't know, like the English teacher in me wants to ask about like your writing parallelism, but it really set up that disillusionment chapter too, where like we saw you really, again, you shared so much with us about your curiosity, your intellectual development, your ability to step into leadership roles, step into supporting roles for other friends who were becoming leaders. And then that disillusionment chapter was so jarring to me. Of course, starting just so personally with the way New York was attacked on 9/11, and then talking about so much of what you were noticing and what you were seeing, and feeling like there were those parallels of you stepping into opportunities to speak your mind, to continue to sharpen your intellect. And I'm wondering, in that disillusionment chapter, you bring up Michael Bloomberg's mayoral race and how he made fixing schools sound easy. And it seems to be a reoccurring theme among education reformers that somehow these easy solutions have just been eluding educators and administrators all these years. What makes this easy fix argument as seductive as it is damaging to our public schools in all of your experience that you've seen?
Well, in the books that I've written, even when let's say I became noted as a conservative or a neoconservative in the 1970s, 1980s, I published in magazines like the Public Interest, Commentary, New York Times Magazine, New York Times, various other places, and wrote on behalf of standardized testing, of we needed reform, we needed change, blah blah blah. I think it's worth reading the book to go deeper into that. But I was well into the conservative intelligentsia world, and I think that when Mayor Bloomberg became mayor, he called on me and asked me if I would be on his personal payroll, which I said I couldn't do, and I didn't, because I felt that he would be owning my name, and I couldn't let anybody do that. But he came in with the idea that fixing schools was easy, and you only had to have better management and you could fix the schools. So then he hired Joel Klein, and Joel Klein had no background in education. And the mayor called and said, well, what do you think of my choice? And I said, what does he know about education? He says he doesn't know anything, but he'll learn. And he began tearing the system apart, firing principals, firing supervisors. And I think that he started off with the idea of, it was very popular at that time, and it was called disruption. And I remember visiting one school where the principal showed me, this is the book that he was given. It's called Creative Disruption. And there was, and probably still is, a professor at Harvard who is the expert in disruption. And he was arguing, and had won over a lot of people in the business community, that disruption is what creates innovation, and that out of disruption, new forms of all sorts of things come forth, and it's very good to break up the old ways, start the new ways. And so I think that Klein was following that playbook, and I don't think it works in education. Maybe it works in industry, I'm not quite sure. I know that I saw an article in the New Yorker about Jill Lepore, where she pretty much demolished disruption theory and said that the companies that were stable were actually more successful than the ones that were disruptive, because so many of them tried and failed. They brought in a new idea, the new idea didn't work, and they were gone. And I remember I started reading business literature when I was writing the crucial book in my career, which was called The Death and Life of the Great American School System, How Testing and Choice Are Undermining Education. And so I started reading business literature and reading about Enron and reading about these companies that had made a huge amount of money, and a lot of people became billionaires, and then they collapsed. And I remember one was called The Smartest Guys in the Room. And I learned a lot from reading the business literature, because they all had theories about how you evaluate people. And they all had, you have to have the data, you have to have the outcomes, you have to crack the whip, lots of punishments, lots of rewards. And these were the theories that Joel Klein brought to his approach to New York City. So we went through the city, and where I live, went through many changes, and it was reorganized. It was reorganized the second time. It was reorganized the third time. A lot of people were fired. A lot of institutional memory was lost. And so we ended up with a lot of school choice, not vouchers, but a lot of charters. And you might have 12 children living in one building going to 12 different schools. And I was told by somebody who worked in the chancellor's office that that was intentional because they didn't want the parents to be able to get together and fight back. They wanted to have them so scattered that there was no community and there was no cohesion amongst parents. And I found myself troubled by this because I could see that there was a lot of gaming the system. The city began investing a lot of money into test prep. And there was a time when test prep was considered unprofessional and even unethical. And people like, there's a man at Harvard named Daniel Koretz. Daniel Koretz has written 2 books about why test prep, it really fails kids, because you can prepare for a specific test, and then if they give you a different test, the one you didn't prep for, you really don't know the subject. And so test prep just teaches you to guess the right answers. You eliminate the obvious wrong ones and you're left with 2 choices, and then you choose one. It's all ridiculous. This is not education. This is not learning. And so I've always had this strong belief in liberal education. And I began to think, this is all very mechanistic and it's spreading across the country. And along comes Bill Gates. And Bill Gates said, well, the answer to everything is small schools. And so he began giving out many millions of dollars for small schools. And he believed, I hope someday he'll change this point of view, that there's one thing that you need to do to fix all the problems. And around 2000 or so, when he started trying to put his imprint on education, it was small schools. And that caused a lot of disruption. And after about, I guess it was 2007, 2008, he decided, well, small schools doesn't fix everything. It's not the answer. And he moved on to a couple of other solutions. One of them was Common Core, and he paid for everything to do with Common Core, the creation of it, the evaluation of it, the process of developing it, everything. And then he invested a lot of money in Waiting for Superman, which was a very anti-public education film. And he paid for it. He was in it. Everybody who, Michelle Rhee, Joel Klein, all the kind of superstars of so-called reform were part of this, and saying charter schools are the answer. They're the only answer. Public schools are failing. And it created this was the kind of reaching out to the public to persuade them that their public schools were no good. And I realized it was going to be very tough to counter this because he had so many millions of dollars. But he didn't give up on charter schools, but then he found another idea, as they say in French, idée fixe. So his fixed idea then became evaluating teachers by the test scores of their students. And I thought, oh my God, this is so stupid, because if you're teaching in a very well-resourced suburban school where the parents are all from high-income families, or at least upper-middle-income families, the kids have high scores. And if you're teaching in a school where the kids are impoverished, where there are many kids who don't speak English, where there are children with disabilities, you can't compete with the scores in that wealthy suburban school. And the people who come at this as businessmen said, well, clearly the suburban school is a great school. The inner city school with all these, with their low scores, that's a terrible school. So they wanted to fire teachers based on the scores of their students. And Bill Gates supported a lot of this. The most important factor, however, in spreading that, as well as charter school, was Arne Duncan's race to the top. $5 billion, and he created a contest for the states. And he said, in order to be eligible to get any part of the $5 billion, you have to make a law to allow charters, and I think 48 states did. You have to make a law to evaluate teachers by their test scores, and almost every state did. And so these ideas, which were really bad ideas that had not been tested, not been validated, became state law almost across the country. Also, Common Core was part of Race to the Top. You couldn't compete unless you agreed to adopt national standards. And the only one wasn't even finished. The writing wasn't finished. The ink wasn't dry. The only one was Common Core. So everyone had the Common Core. They had the Common Core textbooks. They had the Common Core teacher training and Common Core curriculum. And the Common Core has not succeeded. It's been a failure. It's been a failure for many reasons, but mainly it's because it's about preparing for the test. And kids, research now is showing that kids are not accustomed to reading whole books, because Common Core was one of the big ideas in it was that you didn't need to have context in order to read a passage on a standardized test. So kids were reading passages instead of books. But this is, again, this fixed idea that one thing will fix the system, and that is totally ridiculous and impossible. Every school has many moving parts: teachers, students, conditions, resources, leadership, curriculum. All of these pieces, all of them have to work together, and one thing will never fix them. So that's a very long answer to a short question.
Well, that's an incredible history.
The answer we deserve. So thank you. Yes.
Yeah. I'm flashing back to, all of this, and also I'm gonna have to go dig out some of my grad papers where I wrote about a lot of this way back in the day. So I'm gonna hop in really quickly. There was a question in the chat box, and I think it's an important one, given everything that you've talked about in the state of public education right now. And this is also a friendly reminder for folks that if you do have questions, add it to the attendee chat, or send in the Q&A box, and I will try to get those considered tonight. But here's a good one. Good evening. I'm a retired public school teacher and currently serve as a counselor in a private school. When we talk about education reform, what are the things we can do now to attract people to the field? Why is there no conversation around the day-to-day challenges teachers face every day, like devices in schools, lack of school discipline, grade inflation, and the lack of support from the top?
Well, I think it's a great question. And I think that what comes to me, first of all, is that our leadership, the people, whether they're governors, legislators, mayors, congressmen, they think that the only issue is test scores. And so they don't take into account whether the teacher has the resources that he or she needs, or are the kids absentee, and why are they absentee? And did they have breakfast? Did they have lunch? Did they not see what the teacher's doing because they have problems with vision? I mean, one of the things that I've become very attuned to, and I credit a number of people for having educated me, one of them being Richard Rothstein, who wrote a wonderful book about class, race, and schools. And he talks about all the burdens under which impoverished kids live, and not having access to medical care, not having a dental checkup, not having a vision checkup, not having a hearing checkup, living in an apartment with roaches and vermin, not being sure that you'll have a roof over your head. To me, the greatest problem in our society, and it affects the schools are not the causes, and they are not the cure. But the biggest problem is the vast inequalities. And we are living in an age now where income inequality and wealth inequality is probably as great as it's ever been in our society. Maybe the Gilded Age was in the 1890s was worse, but I almost doubt it, because right now there were only a few people who were the creme de la creme in the Gilded Age. In New York, high society was 400 families. We now have, I think, 1,000 billionaires in this country. And, some of them have earned it, but on the other hand, they should pay their fair share of taxes so that our schools are not being impoverished. The other thing that I think is crucial is that, and this is a big change in the last 25 years, and that is this movement for school choice. There is no doubt in my mind that there are very wealthy, powerful people who want to eliminate public education. They think that anything public is no good. They have tried and failed to eliminate Social Security. They consider anything with the word public in front of it is bad. But I always respond by saying, well, the police are public. You don't want to get rid of the police. Oh, no, 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 I don't mean that. Well, how about the firemen? They're all public too. Oh no, I don't mean that either. How about public parks? You think we should get rid of the public parks and just let people find trees wherever they can? No, no, I don't mean that. Public beaches? No, we have to have public beaches. So you can find ways of saying public means public housing, public means public transportation because you don't have a car, or you can find ways of saying a decent society takes care of people and make sure that no one dies in the street because they don't have access to medical care. And I think this is a very low point in our country's history. And I think this is one of the reasons why the schools are under attack, because they're public schools and there are incredibly wealthy people. I was reading about one of them, in addition to Bill Gates and the Walton family. And in one of my books, the one called Slaying Goliath, I actually did the research of listing every billionaire that I could find who was putting money into privatizing public schools. And it's a long, long list. But the Washington Post had an article the other day about a man in Pennsylvania, Jeff Yass. Jeff Yass is the richest man in the state of Pennsylvania, and he's the 27th richest man in the entire world. He went to public schools in New York City. He's a graduate of Bayside High School. And yet Jeff Yass is passionate about vouchers. And when told that he'll say, the schools will all be excellent if everyone goes to the school they want to go to, be it religious or charter or a traditional public school or anything. And when shown evidence that these things are not better than public schools and that they destroy public schools, he said, I don't care. My ideas work. My ideas are better. And they're not. I mean, the research is overwhelming that charters are not better than public schools. And that charters, I mentioned the research on the Network Public Education website. We have tremendous research about the failure of charter schools. There are almost as many that close as there are that open. So you may sign up for a charter school and find out, they didn't open. Where do I go now? I mean, I don't have a choice because my choice is gone. There is a tremendous amount of charter churn, in addition to the fact that there's tremendous fraud and graft in the charter sector, where people go into it simply to make money, and they make a lot of money. There are for-profit chains that are incredibly profitable. The online charter schools are amazingly profitable, and the biggest of them used to be called K-12. It has a new name now. But every one of the top executives is paid multi-millions, not just $1 million, not just 500,000, but 5 million. And they have terrible results. Their scores are bad, the graduation rates are bad, kids drop out, or they'll sign on and never actually participate in the lesson. There is nothing that can replace human contact. And I am not a great fan of technology in the classroom. I know that it's useful. We're using it now. I use it all the time. But I think where children are concerned, they really respond to people, to the human touch, to the man or woman who shows that they have faith in the student and says, you can do it, and show me your work and let me help you. It can be better, and I'll help you make it better. That encouragement is priceless, and no machine can give you that. So I'd say that to go back to your original question is, what can we do? I am become a huge fan of community schools. And I know that the AFT has worked on community schools. The NEA has worked on community schools. I personally am hopeful that the new mayor of New York will make this his mission, because that is the one thing that can make a huge difference. And I think if I were doing, let's say, PR for what we need to do, the first thing I'd do is to do basically what I've been trying to do for 15 years. Our public schools are not failing. Our society is failing to support our public schools. And every time a voucher program is created, it hurts the public schools because money is taken away. And the voucher schools don't accept everyone. The public schools accept everyone. The voucher schools take the kids they want. Many of the charter schools take the kids they want. And if they have a lottery, they manage to get rid of the kids they don't want. And the public schools then take them. So it's an uneven playing field, and we are not making education better by having three competitive sectors. The people on the other side would say competition makes things better. It does in sports. It does in lots of different areas of life and business where you say who can make the most money, and that's your competition. But in schools, competition doesn't make teachers work harder. They're working as hard as they know how. It doesn't make students perform better. What does performance mean? It doesn't mean a test score. It means loving school and loving learning and wanting to learn even when no one's looking.
Thank you so much. And that actually, I don't know if you saw, there was a question about full service community schools. So thank you so much for making sure that you addressed them. It is a program and a process that I have been excited to be a champion of. It really feels good to hear you talk about them and have, and have a feeling that this is a direction we could be going, and we know that it is good for kids. We know that it is good for our students. I was so amazed when you were just rattling off all of those one-hit wonders, silver bullet, quick wins that we have all seen over the last, over 2 decades, 3 decades. And they have these silver bullets, and you actually have research, and you have looking for facts and making sure that you see the details and you look into the details. They have billionaires, and you're absolutely right. There are so many of them trying to sort of play school, I guess, with some of their couch change. But you have surrounded yourself with educators, with administrators and teachers who are offering their firsthand accounts, their own research, who are working alongside you. And I know a lot of them are either joining us tonight or they're going to watch this on demand. And we are certainly going to continue to encourage them to read this incredibly personal book that you have written on education. I'm wondering, what statements, what final thought do you want to offer them as you share your activism, as you share your intellect with them? What are some things you want to say to those educators and administrators and families who either have been or just found you and want to work alongside you?
Well, of course, I would urge you to join the Network for Public Education. There's a lot of wonderful materials about charter schools and about public schools and about vouchers. And I would also urge you to read a book about vouchers, Josh Cowan's book, The Privateers, where he talks about how certain billionaires have created this voucher movement. And every time there's been a state referendum about vouchers, and there have been about 20 of them, the public overwhelmingly says, no, we don't want vouchers. And sometimes, as in Arizona, where teachers and parents worked together to get a referendum on the ballot, and they had to fight the Koch brothers with their billions of dollars. But nonetheless, they got a referendum on vouchers. It went down by 65%, which was an amazing turnout. And the legislature, which was predominantly Republican, went ahead and adopted vouchers. Now, this year, Arizona is spending $1 billion on vouchers, and they have probably the worst funded public schools in the country. Even a small state like New Hampshire, which just adopted vouchers, is going to be spending something like close to $60 million. It's not $1 billion, but it's going to grow every year. And of that $60 million, $59 million is going to support kids who never went to public schools. So this is money taken away from public schools to pay for kids going to elite private schools, going to religious schools. And the first thing I would hope you would know is that public schools are really the best choice. We have to make them better. We can't make them better if our state legislatures keep diverting funding to other forms of choice, which are inferior to public schooling. And as a teacher facing the pressures that you face for testing, which is still high stakes, hold on to your values, hold on to your ethics, believe in what you know to be true, that which is the most important thing, is the children in front of you, the young people in front of you, and that your job is to awaken in them curiosity, a love of learning, and a desire to be better tomorrow than they were today, and to find their abilities and work on those. And that the test scores, you have to read my book there, and there are all the reasons there why the test scores are not a true measure of ability, because there are many different ways to be successful, and the test scores only manage to measure one of them, and it may not even be the most important one, because it's really measuring privilege. So if I could say one thing to you, it's believe in education. You got into this profession of teaching to educate, not just to administer tests, and believe in the children and help them reach their dreams. And that's my message to you. Thank you.
Diane, are you done?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you. That was just such an incredible ending. We are so lucky to have you, and you're getting lots of love in the group chat right now, and lots of hearts and emojis flying on the screen. So incredible ending. I put a link in the chat box. Please rate and review this webinar on Share My Lesson so other people will discover this webinar on demand. And we want to thank everybody for joining us today. We will be back in 2026 with our book club. And we've got some authors that we're lining up right now, and we're really excited to be able to share some of the other authors. And we also have all of the book clubs that we've done as the AFT book club. We've done a full year. We've got all of those on demand, so you can watch any of our previous book clubs that we have right now. So on behalf of Randy, who I know is off to the airport, Diane, thank you. Thank you, Mary Catherine.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you for sharing everything.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been a great privilege to be with you tonight, and thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Yes. And happy holidays. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yes, happy holidays, everyone. Merry Christmas.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.